Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
And so my hope by writing this is that more people would be exposed to the potential barriers of what foster youth will face in education if we don't step in and help, but also that not everyone is created for an educational route, and that's okay. It's not that they can't do it, it's that their passions, their purpose in life is so much different than mine, that we are uniquely made and should be looked at in a unique situation to say, what desires do you have? What purpose do you feel like you have in this life? What passions do you have that we can encourage you and support you in? A lot of conversations that I have is a lot of people will be like, well, Danisha, how can we encourage foster youth to go your route and be who you are and get a PhD? And I'm like, if that's their route, let's 100% root for them, surround them, empower them, do all that stuff. But if their route is not the PhD route, we need to focus on their from foster to blank story and encourage them to go that route and support them and give them just as much encouragement and cheerleading as they did for me.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
Hi there, this is Jake Everly, the producer of the Bonus Babies podcast, and our next guest is Dr. Danisha Keating. She's a public speaker and author of 2 best-selling books, Taking My Voice Back and From Foster to PhD. As a former foster youth, she found herself at a crossroad. Continue what others around her were doing, or take a chance on her future. Now she's a CEO, an international motivational speaker, and an author. At 24 years old, the bootstrap lady, as she calls herself, became the guardian of her 5 siblings. And on a side note, there's a lot of background noise in this episode that's just due to real life. And of course, sometimes environments can't be controlled. Here's Jayne Amelia Larson and Dr. Danisha Keating.
Hello, I'm here with Dr. Danisha Keating. Hi, doctor.
Hi, how are you?
It's really great to have, I'm sure, something like a doctor at the beginning of your name. You've worked really hard for it, I know. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey of just more of education. I think for me particularly, it wasn't the PhD that was the harder part. It was getting through my bachelor's. It took me 8 years to get through, first starting at community college and then transferring over to the university to finish there. But it took a long time because I was facing a lot of just different hurdles after leaving the foster care system. I experienced homelessness from 18 to 24 at over 33 different addresses. So I moved a ton. But being able to finally get through my bachelor's felt like there was some doors that were open that I couldn't open without a bachelor's, but it allowed me to move on to my master's degree and then being able to move to my PhD. But it did feel like the bachelor's was the hardest part.
Yeah, so can you tell me where you're from? In what state were you raised? What was the situation?
Born and raised in California, still out here in California. But yeah, that's kind of where my family was on my dad's side, and my mom's side was kind of in different places in the United States, but we landed here in California.
Right. And were your parents, were they married most of your life? Were they together?
So, but yeah, my parents were married. One of 11 kids. My parents were married for a while. And then when I was about 13 years old, that's when they separated.
Wow. There were 11 kids in your family?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm from 10.
Oh, that's great.
And you really don't, you don't meet that very, very much.
No, it's very, very rare.
Then you went into foster care when you were a teenager. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I entered the foster care system 3 days before my 16th birthday. There was a lot of stuff going on before that, but the final decision was made to remove me from the home and put me in a foster care while I was a sophomore in high school.
So were all the children removed, or just a few of them, or just you, or
At
what?
that point, there was 8 of us that were removed and put into 3 different foster homes.
Right, so you were separated. Wow. Of course, that's what happens.
Yeah, we were separated. It was difficult. And it happens in some cases it doesn't, but with that large of a family, it's bound to happen. That separation it's almost required. You can't take in that many children.
Right. So how did that feel? Do you remember what that was like? Especially the first few days. Do you understand what was going on? Did you agree with it? Did you say, no, 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 this is not right at all? Or how did that roll out?
Oh, I completely fought it. I mean, I was used to being the older one in the home, used to being the person who was in charge. Parents were both kind of absent emotionally, mentally, and physically. And so it was up to us to, each other, each sibling to take our turn of stepping in and stepping up to get each other to school and feed each other and make sure that we were good to go. But when CPS entered into our lives, it was okay. Now you get to be a kid, and we're going to dictate where you go, what you say, what you can't say, or where you go to school, where you live. And it was very real, really just weird because you go from being the adult in the room to, oh no, you get to be the teenager, but you need to be quiet. You can't speak for yourself. I wasn't very aware of what was going on. I had been bouncing from home to home, friends' houses during that period of time trying to get to school. One of the things that I faced a lot was both of my parents believed that women should not be educated at all. And so me going to school was not as important as some of my brothers going to school. So just getting to high school was a challenge. They pretty much had said, we're not going to help you. You'll figure it out and you'll just drop out anyway. So why invest this time with you? So I was already just kind of bouncing around at that point, trying to get myself to school and then get back home and take care of my siblings. And it was a very confusing time because no one would tell me what was going on. I didn't know where my mom was. I didn't have contact with my dad. Wasn't allowed to call my siblings to figure out what was going on. And I was told that I had to trust people who were complete strangers.
Right. So you bring up a really good point that what happens to kids in care very often is they have no autonomy at all, no decision making, nothing that gets completely taken from them. And I can imagine for someone like you who as an older sibling and you sound like a caretaker as well, right? As you described, it sounds like probably what my sisters did in my family. They took care of the younger kids. That was it. That's how it rolls out when there's a big family. But there you are, like pretty much on your own, making it work, doing what you could do in order to get an education and earn your independence. And then shoop, somebody comes in and says, "No, you're going here and you're doing this."
Well, it's you're doing it wrong, and I was doing what I knew how to do, and that was something that even when I looked back through my file, even my parents both blamed us for not doing the house cleaning, the cooking, the cleaning, making sure the shopping was done, taking care of each other. It was always, well, they're not doing their job and their part in this home. We were put on they call it parentification, where you're kind of the parent to the parents and you're teaching them how to be parents, and then you're the parent to the kids. And that was definitely a role that was taken on by us older kids, but also the younger ones. It's very interesting with so many kids. I think are there's a big dynamic of each kid actually having the older sibling syndrome and then a younger or middle child syndrome, because that's where you're kind of placed if there's someone above you or below you. And so when CPS came in and said, hey, you're doing this incorrectly, you're not the parent, you need to step aside, it was kind of like, well, if we don't do it, the parent won't. And there was no understanding there. All of the support went toward the parents versus us kids. And it was a point the finger at the kids for not doing their job. And that's where, for us in our story, and this is not the case for everybody, but for our story was the CPS worker and therapists in family court, moderators. They were just like, you should have done more as the child.
Wow. Wow. Wow, that's just awful. Wow. So those people, did you meet any kind and caring adults who helped you, or was it just a bunch of people telling you what you did wrong?
Within the system, no, but I had teachers at the school that I attended that were very kind and loving and supportive. If it was not for them and friends' parents, I wouldn't have known what was going on was wrong. I wouldn't have known that it's actually not my job. I had a lot of my friends' parents saying, but Denisha, that is not your responsibility. That CPS worker is wrong. That, police officer who's telling you that, you should just do more. That therapist saying, like, you need to be better toward your parents. They're not seeing the full picture, that is not your responsibility. But the people that I dealt with in the system were very different. Now, on this side of things, I have met a lot of very good CPS workers, very good foster families and parents, and other former foster youth. But there are a large portion of foster youth who have experienced very horrible situations in the system.
Yes, I have. Unfortunately, that is true, and a lot of those people have been guests on this podcast. So, when you were 16, things changed a little bit, maybe for the better, but in also a weird way. I think you went to live with your sister at that time, right? I'm basing that on what I've read of your
Yeah,
um,
briefly, we stayed
of
with
your
my older
background.
sister, and it was okay. She had all eight of us in a small apartment. Her and my brother-in-law did, and then we moved to a small home. But they did not get the support that they should have received financially, physically, or emotionally from the system either. They were kind of asked just to do it by themselves, off record. There's actually no record of us going to my sister's home, and that is a very dangerous game to play. There was a lot of support that they should have been getting so that they could keep us and do what they needed to do. But the ultimate goal for us was actually reunification for the majority of my siblings, but not for me.
So then, when you were 18, the CPS worker said, "Okay, you're on your own now," right?
Yeah, so when I was 18, I actually was still in high school. I was a senior at that point. It was the fall semester. My birthday is in October. And so my CPS worker came into the school and pulled me from my classroom and just said, hey, by the way, today's your last day where you're living, and you are required to get out by law, or I will call the police and file sexual abuse toward one of your siblings because you're in the same room as them. So he threatened, and he's like, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to move them. And it was one of those moments that I had a complete panic attack at school, because it was just like, where do I go? And I asked him, I said, where am I supposed to go? He goes, I don't care. Your case is filed. It's not my effing problem, and walked away. And so I started bouncing from, that was actually when I started bouncing from home to home, friend's house to friend's house. And I didn't tell anybody because I didn't think that there was anything anybody would do. And I just kept going to, like every 2-3 days, I'd filter to a new friend's house, and I would just kind of make my way through my last year of high school and just trying to figure it out. But that is when a lot of my bouncing around started for where I was living.
Yeah, and that had to be incredibly stressful. I mean, if you don't, I've seen kids who are doing that, who are going through that, and adults as well. And it's such a difficult position to be in, and then to try to get your schooling in, right? To get where you needed to be, have a life, even when you don't even know where you're going to sleep or how you're going to eat.
It's definitely stressful, but you don't feel it in the moment. You're just like, okay, this is where I'm going. I was used to the bouncing around. I was used to the adults in my life not caring enough, or doing the battle between them. I was labeled as the troublemaker. I actually found this, like, I always kind of felt like like the adults in my life were against me. And I could, like, I was, there's a part of me as I grew older, I was like, yeah, that's probably just something you felt. That's probably not true. I took that on and was like, well, did I really get blamed for things, or did people really label me as that? And it wasn't until this last May in 2024 that I got part of my file. And in it, you see different adults that were in my area. My parents, my CPS worker, the therapist had labeled me as a problem. They put down that because I was abused, I was going to be unsafe around people. And I'm like, I never was admitted anywhere. I've never had any mental health issues. I never was violent. I was never that person. but I was automatically labeled as that. So I was kind of in this mindset at 15 to 18 years old, where I was like, you know what, F this, I'm going to do it myself. Like I have to get, I don't have time to cry over it. And I know that my whole goal was like, if I can get through high school, I can go on to college. I talked to friends. I wasn't looking at the university route, but I was looking at more of the community college route because I just couldn't afford it. I didn't really know a lot about universities. I was very scared and intimidated by it. But someone had mentioned like there's a community college where the classes are really cheap, but they're still good, and you can kind of start there to see where you want to go. And I was like, okay, that'll be my route. I'll go that way. But I was in that moment, I was more of like, yeah, of course, this is what's going to happen right now. Of course, this is how someone's going to kind of come at me. Okay, I'll just deal with it. I was used to that from a very young age, just being the person who, along with some of my other siblings, being the person who was in charge in the room, where it was just like, we just got to do what we got to do. Like, of course, this situation is going to go down this way. But eventually, on this side of things, when I look at it, I'm like, dang, like, how did I survive that? And I think there was just so many moments where I didn't know what else to do but try just to survive. And I look back and I used to blame myself a lot. And I hope if someone's listening to this, it's like, maybe you hear this. It's like, I used to blame myself a lot and think like, oh, you should have done better. You could have done better. You should have asked questions. You should have reached out to people. You should have found the resources. But what I know is that at that time, I didn't know what I know today, that I wouldn't have been able to do it any differently because I was being blocked by different people to getting those resources and the information, that when I did find out about it, it was because I pushed and found the information. But I wasn't able to do different because I didn't know better. I didn't get the information that I have today. That's which is why I share my story, is just because I know there's someone out there who is just like me, being like, man, everyone is against me right now. And it is accurate that there are a ton of former foster youth and foster youth who've experienced the same things that I have, and people who are not even in the foster care system, but just living life where they have been in a very bad environment. And they're like, you know what, this is just what it is. And I'm just going to keep pushing through. And you are doing the best that you can with what you have. And I hope that you hear that there is resources out there for you, and there's resources and people who actually do want to help. Unfortunately, we just have to filter through the people who are in the way at this moment.
Well, thank you for all that, and I will put in the show notes and all the kinds of information where how people can reach you, your website,
Yeah.
and if people want to know more in detail what you're talking about, you've written a book called "Foster to PhD: Letters from a Suitcase."
Yeah.
So, congratulations to you for that,
Thank
because
you.
I know it's a big deal to write a book.
Yeah.
What prompted that? I'm sure it has to do with what you're talking about right now, but getting it out there, right?
Yeah, I think that there is a big misconception that school is really easy. A lot of people used to tell me that oh, it's just, you're just not trying hard enough. One of the things I would always hear in high school is, oh, well, we learned that in the 8th grade. I was like, well, I didn't attend 8th grade. I was homeschooled from preschool all the way to the middle of my freshman year of high school, and entered in March when the school year ended in June. And so there's a lot of information that I didn't have, a lot of education that I didn't have. So I felt like I was kind of blindly walking through it. But even with those hurdles and barriers that I experienced, I know others who have they've faced similar things, and people have just said like, oh, it's just so easy. And we sit back going like, is it me? Am I the issue? Am I not understanding? Is this not the direction I'm supposed to go in? And my hope that when I self-published the book, my hope was that people could understand that there are a ton of barriers for former foster youth and people who have come from hard places that people do not understand exist even in 2024. And I feel that it's harder now than when I aged out of the system in 2009. It is so much harder today to age out of the system because things are so much more expensive. And if you don't have a corner of people or community of people helping and rallying for you, you just don't get access to information. And so my hope by writing this is that more people would be exposed to the potential barriers of what foster youth will face in education if we don't step in and help. But also that not everyone is created for an educational route, and that's okay. It's not that they can't do it, it's that their passions, their purpose in life is so much different than mine, that we are uniquely made and should be looked at in a unique situation to say, what desires do you have, what purpose do you feel like you have in this life, what passions do you have that we can encourage you and support you in. A lot of conversations that I have is a lot of people will be like, well, Danisha, how can we encourage foster youth to go your route and be who you are and get a PhD? And I'm like, if that's their route, let's 100% root for them, surround them, empower them, do all that stuff. But if their route is not the PhD route, we need to focus on their from foster to blank story and encourage them to go that route and support them and give them just as much encouragement and cheerleading as they did for me. But there is a stigma that former foster youth will not do anything with their life. And that, I used to hear it all the time was, Danisha, if you stop here, people would understand. If you want to give up today, people would get it. Just do it. Just give up. And I'm like, no, like, I don't want to do that. I want more for my life. It's not about being applauded. It's not about someone being like, wow, we're so proud of you. I was tired of the same old cycle that I was in. I didn't want that for my future kids. So I knew I needed to put the work in to make a better life for myself. But I hope that people can see that by reading from foster to PhD is to say, you know what, education is hard in general, but being someone who starts further back because of the situations that they've had to go through, they need more people surrounding them and cheerleading with them and encouraging them to find their passions and to live their purpose in life and not put almost like a label on them saying, well, it's not good enough because it wasn't a CEO of a company or a president of the United States or a PhD. It's like getting their driver's license is just as good as what I've been able to do. Getting a job is just as good as what I have been able to do. It deserves the same amount of cheers because those things are difficult in general. And then you add all the barriers on. And that's my hope, is that people can read this and say, you know what? I don't care what somebody's route is, as long as it's legal, as long as it's going to benefit them, I'm going to cheer them on. If they want to be a construction worker or a business owner or go for their PhD, I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, that shouldn't be your route, because I don't think, that's what you should do. I think you could do more with your life. Everyone's route is different, and we need to be able to cheer that on.
Yeah, hooray to that, because that's really the truth. We're all individuals, and there's no one sure, perfect, happy way.
Right.
I just want to go back to something that you talked about earlier, and that is when you opened your case files and you read what people wrote about you. How did that make you feel?
It didn't actually make me feel anything. I know for others that I talked to before reading it, they're just like, be careful, be gentle with yourself, because this is a stranger who doesn't know you. This document was, for the file that I got, was 375 pages, and it only spanned 2 years. I thought it was like my whole 10 years of dealing with the CPS before I took my siblings in. But it only is a 2-year span, and there's 375 pages, and most of it is redacted. Most of it's blacked out, so I can't see it. But looking at it, it was very validating for me, because I had believed for a really long time that something was wrong. And then I was gaslit to believe that what I remembered was wrong. And like the abuse was wrong. How I was treated was not how it really went down. I was over emotional and oversensitive, and I was taking it too hard when someone just basically told me no. And looking at the details in this file, I was like, wow, I wasn't gaslit. I was set up for failure. I was mistreated. I was labeled as this issue. But then there was surprises of things that spanned back to when I was 2 or 3 years old. There was a couple entries. So now I'm trying to see if there's another file out there in a different county. But really looking at this, you see how people missed the mark when they shouldn't have. There was 3 weeks before we were finally taken, a CPS worker said, house is clean, house looks good, food in the fridge. But then 3 weeks later, it's like, house smells like this. There's all this gross stuff all over the floor. There's no power, there's no electricity, it's exposed wire. And like you see it and you go, that doesn't happen in 3 weeks. You don't have an infested home with bugs and mice and stuff in 3 weeks. That just doesn't happen that quickly. So someone somewhere said, I'm just going to push the truth off to the side because, this parent is, quote unquote, trying their best. And that made me kind of sit back and be like, okay. But then one of the surprises I didn't know was 5 months before we were taken, my parent actually said, I'm willing to give these children to the system because I can't do it anymore. And then nothing was done for 5 months. And then I kind of sat back and was like, wow, okay. So first there was a little bit of anger of like, wow, you actually said to like, just take us. But then I looked at the dates and I was like, but they didn't act for 5 months. And then all of it went down in a very different way. And it went down in a very horrible, traumatic way that could have been, I think, more avoided. And there could have been better solutions if that parent was partnered with for 5 months versus completely abandoned for 5 months. And I recognize that there is a issue where parents are asking for help and being told like, okay, we're going to have a plan. We're going to get a plan together and do this with you. And then they're just completely ignored for 5 months until it's worst case scenario. And our lives were put in danger because of it. And it's just like, I kind of sat back for a second and I was like, okay, that's not great. That's not good information. That's not something that I knew. But then being able to be like, okay, how do we have the system change that situation and see that even that 5 months before that, they should have stepped in and said, hey, this is not a safe environment for these children. But there was a lot of ignoring going on. So it was very validating when I looked at it to be like, I'm not crazy. These things actually happened. There was people ignoring it. There was somebody who was very rude notating things. They did label me as the issue and the problem and an unsafe person when I was never unsafe. It was just that they were led to believe based off what my parents said. And then it really opened my eyes to understand that the system, that in my case and several other cases, is that they're protecting the parent, but they're not actually advocating for the child like they're supposed to.
Wow. So I want to go back again to the idea that you were labeled. And this is something I've been thinking about it. And we exchanged briefly via email about this. That one of the reasons why I call this podcast Bonus Babies is because that's a term that a woman I know uses to talk about the kids that she's taken into care. And because I think there's such a stigma attached to the word foster kid, and I see it all over the place. And I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about that, about what was your experience and what's your perception of that?
Personally, for me, I mean, I don't like taking words out of context. I think words matter. When we take away the word homelessness and we just say unhoused, it's to make people feel comfortable. I don't feel shame in, even when I was homeless, it was a very real situation. And I felt that people were dismissing the severity of what I was going through. I was living in my car for a full year as a girl that is very unsafe. I was house hopping to strangers' homes and people would just be like, oh, you're unhoused. I'm like, no, I'm homeless. Like I have nowhere to go. When we look at the foster youth title, it has been something that has been used in movies to say like, okay, this kid is going to come in with a black leather jacket. He's going to be a problem. He's going to be, usually it's a boy and usually it's someone who's very aggressive. And I know so many former foster youth or people who have experienced foster care, whatever way you want to say it is it's true. It's like, I'm not foster care. I am not the system. I didn't cause the issues. I did live through experience, but my journey didn't end and start with foster care. It was started way before that. But the issue is that we see so many times that the shows, TV shows and movies will portray a usually an older boy with a leather jacket, super aggressive and a bully. And they're just like, oh, he's a troublemaker, he's this, and then, oh, he's coming from a hard life. And it's like, most of us are not like that. We're hiding because we don't want people to know, because we're tired of being labeled. But also the issue is that we don't want people to know what's going on, because we have been taught and trained not to talk about our stories from way before the foster care system. And I know for myself, like I was always told by my parents, don't tell anybody because they don't understand. Don't put our family stuff on blast. Like stop airing our dirty laundry. We'll figure it out. It's a family matter, not a world matter. And even today, sharing my stuff on social media, I share parts of my story, and I get messages from old family friends and some family members who just go, I really would appreciate you not sharing your story. And it's nothing about them. It's 100% of what I just went through. And they're not my siblings. So it's kind of like, you're my uncle or my aunt or my second or third cousin, and you're somehow ashamed of me sharing my story. And what I have found is that when we label somebody, we usually only know one or two people, if that have experienced it, and we label people based off that. I don't care about the term former foster youth. I've also said, I'm just not the foster care system. So people will sometimes come to me and say, well, why don't you make the change in the system? Why don't you use your power or your connections? And it's like, well, there are so many areas of foster care, of the system, of all of this that I'm not even connected to, that I have no reach in, that I have no say over. I didn't cause the situation to happen in my life, but so many times that label was, you should have done better. I still hear that from parents, and foster parents, mind you, have said, why do you feel like you needed to be the hero of your siblings? And I said, I didn't feel that way. They're like, well, you shouldn't have stepped up. You should have let someone else take care of it. And I'm like, there was nobody else. And that, I think there's a lot of judgment that comes in from people. And it is sometimes grounded in just stop talking. I think it makes, when I share my story, sometimes the reason I get some of those responses, though, it actually comes down to, it's stirring something in that person. Maybe there's a family member that they know going through it that they didn't help. Maybe there's a friend that they have discovered went through stuff and they had no idea. And so when I share what I share, it will trigger something in them to say, wow, I didn't step up. Or maybe they went through abuse themselves, and that could be a thing too. Sometimes there's some things that they haven't healed from, and it makes them realize that they've gone through that, and they don't want to admit that. And that's not something that is for me to try to unpack with them. But the stigma that I feel is still very much out there is that if you had been better, if you had just done better by your parents, you wouldn't have experienced the trauma. The other stigma, as an older former foster youth, when I have shared parts of my story of homelessness, people have said, you should have just gone home. You should have apologized to your parents. You shouldn't have exposed them if you didn't want to be abandoned by them. And that is something, again, that we have a culture that victim shames and protects the predators.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something where,
Mm-hmm.
You usually also see in movies is just, there's a parent, it's always out, like if you ever see the foster youth side, it's like, oh, they're a drug addict and alcoholic. It's like, it's not always the case. The parent is not always a drug addict or alcoholic. My parents were not. They were abusers, but not every former foster youth has experienced the same thing. Not every foster care youth has experienced the same thing. And I think we really need to understand that every single youth that has gone through the system is there for a different reason. It is case by case. It's different. We're not all the same. We don't experience all the same things. There might be some similarities, but we are not the same.
So you referenced just a moment ago taking care of your siblings. Can you talk to me about that? What happened? Because all of a sudden you had them all. You were trying to do your best.
Yeah.
Right?
At 24, so after finally getting some stability, I was able to get an apartment and got an apartment with my 18-year-old brother at the time. And then a month later, took in a 19-year-old brother. And then 3 months later, got a call to pick up my brother's sister and my other brother, who were 12, 14, and 15. And there was just more abuse, more situations going on. And that at 24 years old, I was the guardian of a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 15-year-old in a house. In our house, we had 6 of us living in a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment that was 500 square feet.
Wow.
It was a lot, and there was a lot of things that led up to that. But it all stems down to that the system failed us, and the system is the people who work it and the people who turned a blind eye.
And I've seen your post where you mentioned people taking your story and you want to own your own story. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? I'm very curious because you're you're like really passionate about that. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So there has been quite a few situations in the last 3 years of becoming an advocate, and even way before that, before becoming an advocate, of people wanting to hear parts of my story and then taking what I tell them, usually from a private conversation, and regurgitating it to benefit themselves. So I had done, a couple times I had done a speaking event, and the person was like, hey, please send me your PowerPoint so we can share it from our computer. And I'm, completely innocent and like, oh yeah, you're going to do well by me. And so they brought me in on one event, and then I had like 3 other events set up with this person. And then they canceled the 3 other events, took my PowerPoint and did the presentation and just took my pictures out.
What?
Yeah. So like they took all the research that I had, they took all and this is after post PhD. I just launched my book, self-published, trying to get my name out there, trying to, encourage foster youth, foster parents, staff, and faculty. And they took my PowerPoint and just said, hey, by the way, we don't need you. We got the gist. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I said, that's actually mine. You can't take that. They said, well, we paid you for it. We had you create it for us. So it technically is ours. And I didn't have anything in writing to be like, this is mine, like copyright. Obviously, I know that now looking back and being like, oh, I created it. That's a copyright right there. Like I can prove that I created this. So then I stopped sending my PowerPoints to people, and people understood as soon as I said, I was like, hey, I just recently had someone steal my PowerPoint and I've had to recreate everything because they literally told me I couldn't go and present on this anymore because I created it for them, which I did not. I did not create this for them. They brought me in as the speaker, asked me to do a topic. I created this stuff, and then they went and regurgitated it for about 1.5 years. Other things
Wow.
have been where people who work in the system or they're advocates in the system, that they do not have a former foster youth background, but they've been in the system a long time, have pulled me and others into private rooms or private conversations and said, tell me your story, tell me your story, tell me this. And they'll ask questions. And they are like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for sharing with me. And then all of a sudden you see them posting blogs, writing a book and releasing it. And there's parts of things that happened to me that is very apparent to my situation of like, and a young former foster youth who was 24 years old took in her 5 siblings and lived in a 500 square foot apartment in California. And I'm like, interesting, because there's not a lot of us who have taken on our siblings. There's not a lot of us who are 24. There's not a lot of us who said, their dad was the details, but they just took my name out of it. And then I started finding out, and here's why I started getting really upset. It wasn't about, them taking from me. I was kind of like, oh, that's stupid. But when I'm getting paid $200 for sitting down and doing this event with them, and then they're rehashing that out and getting $10,000 or $5,000 or $2,500 to do their event, I sit back and I go, oh, you used me. And most of the time it's for free, but there's a couple times I've been paid very, very low. And then you took from me to benefit yourself because you knew you could market yourself better. You knew you had more connections than I did. And then recently it actually did happen. And it was very sad because it was in the guise of like, hey, I want to show you how to open these doors. I have doors to open to put you through. I want to make sure you're a good fit. That person took our stuff in a group setting and then even took an idea that I had, and I've already built it, but I'm trying to strengthen it and open it up as a community for former foster youth, so I can show them, here's how, if you'd like to be trained in how to speak, if you'd like to write your book and do a self-publish, here are some questions that, because I've done that, I've done all of my own marketing and sending out my book to be able to sell over 3,000 copies, and trying to show others how to do that, because no one's showing us how to do things. And I love, information is key, knowledge is power, knowledge is what gets us through doors. So it's like, why not just give back in that way? And this person put in a big email blast with a bunch of other people and said, I have this idea, and it was verbatim, to build my community, and said like, oh, we're collectively doing this. And I was like, no, we're not. Like, I said this in our meeting, and you called me and asked me questions on it. And I kind of sat back and I was like, wow, I'm 34 years old and I'm still having people steal stuff. And you know, it is something that, you know, people have said, like, Danisha, isn't that an honor when someone steals from you because you have a really good idea? And I said, no, it's a slap to the face, because I'm old enough to fight for myself and stand up now. But other former foster youth who are 18 years old, 19 years old, they're being asked to do these events that are, you know, free. They're being asked to speak at galas. They're being asked to speak for fundraising events. They're being asked to speak at colleges or organizations for free. And then they're going home and not getting food or gas. And I had a friend reach out to me after I shared the first time that happened and said, you know, I got paid $200. And luckily I have my own business to where that $200 didn't, you know, it filled my tank up and got us groceries for the week. But, you know, luckily I have more income coming in. Imagine if that's all I had. And she's like, oh, I wanted to let you know that my very first time that I shared my story, I spoke for someone and raised them. Like, they told me it was like $25 million that we raised that night. And I went home with no food. They didn't feed me. They actually asked me to leave early because they were like, we want to make sure, like, you're too young to be here anyway. And she went home and she broke down on the side of the road because she ran out of gas. And she got home, like, finally got home, and her fridge was empty. And she's like, wow, it must have been so nice for them to get $25 million. And she's like, you know, I was just like, but the cause, for the cause. And so when she told me that, I was like, this is happening across the board. And then time and time and again, when I have shared that, I have other former foster youth or advocates come out and say, like, hey, I've had someone steal my stuff too. It's so discouraging. Do I keep going? Do I rebuild? Do I call them out? And what actually happens in the community is that we get scared to step up. And I got into that the first year that started happening, where people were stealing from me. I really did sit back and I was like, well, if I say anything, if I do anything, I won't get any speaking events. No one will book me. I don't want to be a problem. And it wasn't until this year that I was like, no, this has to stop. Like, that's why I started sharing and speaking out, was because someone else had said, hey, this has happened to me. And I never said anything. And that was 10 years ago. And it still hits me wrong. And I recognize that there are people out there stealing from former foster youth. And you see this, they have books where it's all like, there's nothing about their experience. It's all about everybody else's. It's giving basically like a case study of presenting former foster youth that they worked with, but they don't say anything about, like, hey, the foster youth that were part of this book were compensated. They were brought into the process. They approved what I wrote. None of that is in there. And then they have blogs on this and they go around speaking, and they're invited to these tables and they speak on our behalf, but they never actually brought us into the room and said, this is what I'm using your content for. And that is very sketchy. That's very wrong. Because when someone has actually presented that to a group of us, you will see that people will not share. As you get older and as we get, you know, more into the advocacy side as a former foster youth, we actually started to get quiet. And then when the room was closed and we left, people started emailing each other and like, hey, did anyone else feel awkward about this? Did anyone else feel like we understood why we were being asked to be in this room? And it was like, no, but nobody was wanting to share. And then, you know, then we have a lot of, like, where I feel, and personally, I know this isn't just me, but I'm only going to speak on my behalf, is that I have felt that if I say anything, the speaking events will stop. The people will stop bringing me to the table, because then I'm labeled as that issue. I'm labeled as the person who's going to stand up for myself. But I'm recognizing on this side of things that other people are coming behind me and they are wanting to share their stories, and they're going, you know, Danisha, are you getting paid for this event? Are you getting paid to be brought to the table? Because I'm not. And that's difficult to hear, is when someone's saying, I'm not getting paid and I can't afford my bills, but look at the mass amount of money I'm being able to help raise because I'm sharing my story. But then no one is saying, hey, let's not just pay them $200. Let's pay them as if we have a real keynote speaker coming in, as we already do. But when I asked someone that, I challenged someone that, I said, why don't you bring in a foster youth and pay them $5,000? And that person responded and said, well, they're not very good at speaking. I said, then you need to help them and you need to stop using them for $200. And that didn't fly over very well. But it was one of those situations that you sit back and you're like, interesting that you're willing to pay someone else $15,000 because they're a little bit more shiny in their message, but you're using a former foster youth to produce this mass amount of money coming in for your benefit, but you're not going to actually pay them well, which is very sad.
Yeah, no, that's I can acknowledge that too. I just want you to know, Dr. Keating, you are not a problem. You're a powerhouse.
I know that I'm not a problem, but there are moments when you, and it stems back to how I've always kind of felt of that. And that's where I've had to tell myself, like, no, girl, like, you're not the problem. You're not the issue here. The issue is that people are stealing from people to help their careers and help them expand. But if we are not going to call it out and say, hey, this is not okay, this is not happening on my watch, you can't target me to target other former foster youth in this space, which is also the other thing is happening, is that they will target me. They'll go through my friends list on Facebook or Instagram, or they'll ask me for other people to bring into their spaces, and then they'll treat them worse than they treated me. And I'm like, nope, that's not going to happen. So I have a duty now to protect former foster youth who come behind me. And I had someone's like, I'll filter it, don't worry. And I said, I'm just going to let you know that this person did me dirty in a very professional way. Just say, hey, this was my experience. I hope that is not the experience that you face, but just be aware that this could happen. And people have come back and they said, hey, it did happen. And I just always say, I'm so sorry, that's not okay. I know that I'm not the problem. I know that I'm not a problem. I know that I'm not going to face that not getting booked again. But what's going to happen is that other people are going to come behind me, and they're going to go, well, if Danisha went this route and she's successful in getting speaking events and getting money for this and selling her book, maybe I could too. But if I don't warn them, and if I don't speak up to the person doing it, I'm just perpetrating this whole thing and letting it happen, versus speaking up and saying, hey, what you did is not okay. I'm letting you know. I hope you can receive this. And if you don't, this relationship is going to be done, and I'm not going to be pointing people in your direction.
Can you tell me a little bit about where you are in your life right now, if you care to, in terms of your own family situation? We've heard your daughter there. Do you have kids now? Or are you?
I do. So I still have my one of my brothers with us. We just actually moved, so we've been in the process of unpacking. This
Mm.
probably I did some calculations, and I believe that this could be like move number 39 or 40 if I count some moving to storage units and stuff. But I think this is number 39 move
39
in my
times
life.
in your
Yeah,
young life.
39 times.
That's
It's
more
too many
times
times.
than your age,
Um,
right? Wow.
I yeah, I was like, wow, that's really crazy. And I only moved 3 times until I was in high school. But we have a daughter. She's 2 years old, married for the last 6 years, been with my husband for 7 years. And we really do feel the call to continue to share my story. We've been working on a documentary to highlight, it's going to be called 33 Roofs, but it highlights foster youth homelessness and educational barriers, telling my story, but also partnering with other communities, partners, and organizations that I've personally worked with and know people at that have helped former foster youth or people in hard places, to just say, like, hey, this is what we can do to spark change. And really the advocacy side of just helping other people figure out where they want to share their stories, but also how to better treat former foster youth, if it's a parent, if it's a teacher, if it's a staff member, if it's just someone randomly being like, hey, I'm just going to be their friend, like, what can I do? My hope is to be able to share, not to bash on the system, not to bash on my parents, but to just say, hey, here's the situation, let's look at the situation. What can we change about this? How can we help someone feel value? How do we help someone feel purpose? How do we help someone feel loved and cared for and seen? If we're not doing those things, we've lost the mission of what we're supposed to do.
So, how do you feel about what you're doing? I mean, it sounds like I could imagine, with after everything you've been through, to say, I'm done helping people. I'm done. I need to focus on myself and my own well-being and my family, and that's what I need right now. But you're not doing that. Although I'm sure those things are also important to you. You're saying I have more.
There's definitely a difference between for me, I've kind of jumped back and forth of, saying like, oh, maybe we'll become foster parents one day, or do you foster or do adopt? And there's moments where I've sat back and I'm like, okay, this is why. Like I'm still healing from a lot of the emotional hurt that happened. Being a guardian at 24 years old, and still, having my brother with me. My job right now is my daughter, my husband, and my brother, making sure that our family unit is good. And speaking is where I feel that I can do that, and then take breaks, and then have downtime and rest time. But being able to connect with former foster youth who are in college, or figuring out their kind of route as an adult, that is where my passion really is. And my heart is, because there's so many people who, there's enough people focusing on K through 12 grades. There's tons of people there, but there's not a lot of people in the spot of young adults from when we age out. There's not a lot of people guiding us. And that, I feel, is the most complicated and confusing time of our lives, because we were thrown out into the world and expected to speak up and be all these things. But my heart has been kind of there, and kind of sitting there. And I really value being able to speak to former foster youth or foster parents who message me on social media a lot. And they're just like, hey, thank you for sharing your story, because I felt like I was alone. And it's, you don't need a stage. You sometimes just, your little corner of the internet is where you can make a difference, and just say, hey, I see you, and I'm here for you. And we take a lot of downtime, because it can be very exhausting. There's a lot of burnout that can happen with advocacy. Um, it's a lot. There's a lot of damage out there in the system. And I think a lot of people use a phrase where they're just like, well, it's broken, and they kind of shrug their shoulders and walk away. And I'm recognizing, like, we are the system. A friend I follow, her name's Angela Tucker. She's like, guys, we are the system. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, us today, even when we're not in the system, we are part of the system, that we have the opportunity to help. And I might not be able to be a foster parent right now. I might not be emotionally ready for that, but where I am at is where I can give, and the capacity I can give in, and that is good. And that is something that is a beautiful thing, is when we can all find our place in the system to say, what can I do? I might not be able to be a foster parent. I might not be able to give money, but maybe I open my home and just let someone who's having a hard time come in and have dinner with us, and that's it. Just finding our part is so important. And I think that is bigger and better than someone who is running 100 miles 24/7. We will eventually burn out. And so being able to say, here's where I can give today, here's my 10% that actually is 100%, it's a game changer to making a change in somebody else's life.
I love that idea that we are the system. It's not separate from us. If we're not part of it, then it's never going to get better.
100%. And I think when we really understand that we are actually part of the system, we're just either ignoring it, and we're ignoring our part, or we're trying to actively be part of it in some way. That really helped when Angela Tucker said that, and I was like, dang, like, I'm doing my part, because I used to think I wasn't doing enough. I would sometimes, when I'm sharing my story, it still happens today, I'll share parts of my story, and someone in the audience is like, well, what are you doing to make a difference? And they're not asking, like, what do you see in the future? They're very aggressive, and like, you're not doing enough today. And I have always had people who are running the event go, and we're like, we're going to speak into this. She is doing plenty. And I think what it does, because I'm sharing my story, I think what it does do is it lights a fire in an individual, where they're just like, the system is so freaking corrupt or broken or hurting, and we're not doing enough. And so it's more of a response of frustration. It's not at me, it's not targeted at me, but it is targeted as, like, I'm so sad, because of, they know there's something happening. Maybe they know a former foster youth that they're working with. Maybe their kid is a former foster youth, or maybe a current foster youth, or their family member, or something's happening to where it stirs inside of them to say, I'm so angry that this is still happening, and or is happening to somebody I care for. And again, I don't think it's personal toward me, but they just choose to finally be able to verbalize that out. And I can understand that frustration. I've been there, where I'm just like, what are you doing? and you can't do much, but maybe somebody else can do more. And maybe maybe the voices of the foster youth is what we need more of. And we do need people inviting us to those conversations, because we're often left out of the conversation for these changes.
Well, that's exactly why I'm doing this podcast, because I think that people don't hear enough from the people who have been through it. And uh,
Right, correct.
that's really, to me, that is the bottom line. The people, now I'm thinking about it differently. We are the system, but to hear from people in the system who've been through the system, working in the system, trying to make a difference, or also ones who've been through it and say it didn't work because of this, that, and the other thing, or it worked because of this. So I think that's the only way that you can actually grow and learn. I want to ask you one last thing that I ask all my guests, and will also ask you to dig deep for this if you can, although you've already dug deep in many ways. What is the one thing that no one would ever know about you unless you told them?
Yeah, I'm actually an introvert. People don't know that. I'm an introvert. I get exhausted very quickly. I have learned to be a social extrovert by force, because I recognize that either that or I'm sitting by myself all the time. I value the deep relationships that I get to have with people, but it is very hard for me to go out and make friends, and like it is hard for me to step on stages. I get super nervous, and because of my dyslexia, I get a lot of anxiety and nervousness from that. So I practice a lot. I run over material a lot. I practice in the car. I talk to myself 24/7, almost sometimes even in my sleep. I will find that I'm waking myself up because I'm talking in my sleep because I'm so nervous of what I'm going to say. But I have learned how to practice some rest after. I know May is usually a really busy season for me because of Foster Care Awareness Month, and I do some speaking events then, but I always plug in fun time and like a small mini vacation, just going somewhere for a couple days to rebuild that rest, and then I shut my voice off because I get tired. I really do, and people are like, "Yeah, Danisha's so extroverted," and then you live with me, and you're like, "Oh, you had a really busy week, and you just went straight to your room." I'm like, "I'm actually an introvert."
Mm.
My husband is a very, very, very big introvert. And so it works very well. So then he knows I'm like, I am so pooped out. And he's like, it's because you're an introvert and you're actually a social extrovert. You do get joy with talking with people. But when you are done, you're like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
And so I've learned, to rest. And I've learned to also be very vocal about that with, when I used to move a lot, I'd always have to tell the person I lived with, like, you will see me outside. I'm a very different person outside than where I am in my home life. Like I'm a very much of an introvert because I give so much in person. Just going to school, like when I would just go to school and then come back, I would like sleep from the time I got home to like the next day because it was just like, this exhausts me. And so for me, going into a college setting was actually very good for me because it was like, oh, I can go to school 2 days a week and then just go to work after
Right.
that.
And then shut down the
But
rest of the
people don't
time.
know
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And people are like, but you're a speaker. You like doing music. You like doing worship at church. You like to be out and about. But I'm like, I can't do that 3-4 days in a row. I get so exhausted when I have like, I'll have 4 or 5 Zooms in a day. And that knocks me out for like 2 days. And people are like, how? You seem like you're so comfortable. I'm like, I am comfortable in that environment, but I've learned the power of rest after. And my daughter is definitely like, she loves being out and about. She loves walking. She loves cuddling. She also has that seam though. She'll go out and she's a social extrovert and she comes home and you can tell she's just like, I'm so tired. You're too. And I'm like, I recognize it. Okay. We're all introverts. This is really good. But we go stir crazy. Like when it's raining outside or too hot outside, me and her go a little stir crazy. So it's like, okay, let's go outside. Let's go do something. Let's go be somewhere. And then we're like, wow, we're really tired. So yeah, people don't know that though. And then they're like, but I thought, so if I, we get to a back room and I'm really quiet and I'm sitting there and people are like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm just so tired now. And that's something people don't know about me.
So is there anything else that we haven't covered that has been left out that you'd like to add? Anything about your hopes or dreams or your
I don't,
thoughts or your
yeah.
anything?
My hope is just that, people are willing to just remember that every former foster youth and foster youth have a different story. It's not a one size fits all, that we are different in our likes and dislikes, and even in our story of what happened to us. And just to remember that, because it's super important to sit back and recognize that we might not know the person sitting in front of us. What they've gone through is very different. I could sit down with 6 different former foster youth and all of us go, hey, here's some similarities, but how vastly different our stories are. And they're so unique and beautiful and hard and crazy. And we sit there and we go, man, this is a lot, but let us be, sitting at the table with people, because we need to be able to see the full picture.
That's really important to hear, and I'm glad that we're closing with that because, as we said a little earlier, we all are individuals. We're different, and our needs are different.
Yes,
And yeah,
absolutely.
and a lot of those needs you can't see. Just as you said, that sometimes you just need quiet. You need to be on your own and quiet,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. And other people, they're like, no, I need to keep going. And I'm like, you exhaust me. I love you, but I tap out.
Yeah.
So a few of my friends are extroverts, and I'm like real extroverts. And I'm like, I gotta tap out. I love you. And they're like, cool, I'll see you later. I'm like, bye. Love you too.
Listen, it's been really great talking to you, and I admire you very much. I admire the work you're doing. I admire your bravery, and I think you're a powerhouse.
Thank you. Try to be. But yeah, it's been fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Danisha, for joining us today. I can't help but think about the story you told about how you were blamed for the abuse you were receiving. And I think part of the message, or part of what we'd like to do, is help people understand that the child is not the problem. And that's part of our mission, is to change that paradigm. It's really important for people to know that they're kids just trying to find their way, and they need our help. So thank you so much. It's really great that you could join us today. And just to remind everyone, you can check out Danisha's resources, book, and documentary at her website, DanishaKeating.com. Thanks again, everyone, and join us next week for our next episode. If you or someone you know is harming themselves or thinking about harming themselves, go to crisistextline.org. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org, and in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposto. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.